Okay, think about, well, everything you do, from waking up to going to sleep. What actually drives all that? What's the engine?
Right. That's the big question of motivation.
And today we're diving into one of the earliest ideas about it, the instinct theory of motivation.
Exactly. We've looked at some really interesting material here that explores this foundational concept,
Mm.
what it proposed, the key people behind it.
And also why it's maybe not the whole story today.
Precisely. Despite its historical weight, modern psychology sees things a bit more complexly now.
So our mission for this deep dive,
Yeah.
really get a handle on this instinct idea, understand the core theory, the big names McDougall, Freud, James, and figure out why this perspective, while important historically, faces scrutiny now.
Sounds good.
Okay, so let's start right there. When we talk about instinct in the psychological sense, what are we actually talking about?
Well, the fundamental idea of instinct theory is that our motivations stem from uh, inborn biological urges.
Okay, innate stuff.
Yeah, innate. These are drives aimed at survival. Hunger, thirst, sex, rest. The theory posits these instincts push us and animals to act in certain ways.
So not learned behaviors, like you don't learn to be hungry.
Exactly. An instinct, in this view, is a goal-directed behavior pattern that's innate, not learned through education or experience. It's supposedly part of our biology.
Can you give some examples from the animal world, maybe?
Oh, absolutely. Think about
Yeah.
a dog shaking itself dry after getting wet,
Right, totally automatic.
or a sea turtle just hatched, immediately heading for the ocean. That's not learned.
Wow.
Or birds migrating before winter. That's a huge, complex behavior driven by instinct. And Konrad Lorenz's famous work with the geese imprinting,
Ah, yes, following the first thing they see.
that's a classic example of an instinctive bonding mechanism.
It's amazing stuff. Now, this idea wasn't just about animals. A key figure, William McDougall, really pushed this for humans too, right? What was his take?
McDougall was definitely a major proponent. He had strict criteria for what counts as an instinct. It had to be unlearned,
Okay.
uniform in how it's expressed across the species,
Makes sense.
and universal, meaning every member of the species has it. He also thought each instinct involved three things: perception, behavior, and emotion.
So it's not just doing something, it's noticing the trigger and feeling something about it too.
Precisely, the whole package.
And he actually listed specific human instincts.
He did. Quite a few, actually, about 18 in his main list. Things like sex, fear, laughter.
Laughter as an instinct. That's interesting.
Yeah, also parental instinct, curiosity, escape, repulsion, jealousy, hunger, self-assertiveness. Quite a range.
What was the thinking behind including something like laughter or curiosity? Hunger and sex seem more obviously tied to survival.
Well, yeah, hunger is clearly for survival, needing food. Sex for continuing the species.
Yeah.
Self-preservation, which involves fear or aggression, is for defense. The reasoning for others, like laughter or curiosity, was perhaps more about social bonding or exploring the environment, which could also have survival advantages indirectly. Though, as you can imagine, defining these gets trickier.
I bet. Now, another giant, Sigmund Freud, he also talked about instincts or drives. How did his ideas fit in? Was it similar to McDougall?
Freud's perspective had overlaps, but also key differences. He saw instinct, or tribe drive, as more like an involuntary stereotyped response. A bit like a reflex, maybe.
Okay.
But he didn't have a long list like McDougall. Freud focused on really two fundamental drives.
Ah, the famous ones, life and death instincts.
Exactly.
Yep.
Eros, the life instincts, that includes things like sex, hunger, thirst, basically pleasure-seeking, survival, procreation.
Okay.
And then Thanatos, the death instincts. This was more controversial.
Why is that?
Well, it suggested this innate drive towards destruction or self-destruction, manifesting as aggression, risky behaviors.
So even aggression for Freud was this fundamental built-in drive.
That was his idea, yes. An instinctual push towards harm or aggression. He even talked about catharsis.
Release.
Yeah,
Wait.
the idea that aggressive acts could release this pent-up instinctual energy.
Okay, so McDougall's list, Freud's dual drives. What about William James? He was another early influential psychologist.
James had a slightly different angle. He acknowledged instincts, but felt human behavior was, well, way more complex than just instincts alone could explain.
So he saw the animal connection but emphasized human complexity.
Pretty much. He definitely connected human actions to animal instincts, rooting it in evolution and survival functions.
Did he list any specific ones he thought applied to humans?
He did. Things like anger, fear, shame, love.
Yeah.
And interestingly, cleanliness.
Cleanliness as an instinct. Why that?
Well, you could argue there's an evolutionary advantage, right? Reducing disease risk, it makes you think.
It certainly does. Okay, so we have these theoretical frameworks. Where do we see potential examples of this in actual human behavior, especially early on?
Infant reflexes are the classic examples often pointed to. They seem purely automatic, right?
Yeah, like the rooting reflex. Touch a baby's cheek and they turn to suckle.
Exactly. That's vital for feeding. Or the suckling reflex itself, pressure on the roof of the mouth, triggers sucking.
And the Moro reflex, the startle thing.
That one too, where they fling their arms out.
Yeah.
And even the Babkin reflex, rubbing their palms, makes them open their mouth and flex their arms.
Mm-hmm.
Early researchers really saw these as strong evidence that maybe instincts controlled a lot of human behavior, just like in animals.
It makes sense when you see those newborn responses. Now, shifting to animals, the examples seem even clearer, more widespread.
Oh, definitely. Innate behaviors are everywhere in the animal kingdom. Birds and insects are great examples.
Like what?
Think of baby birds in a nest. They instinctively gape their mouths open when the parent returns.
Triggering the parent to feed them.
Right. And the parent instinctively regurgitates. Or kelp gull chicks pecking at that red spot on the parent's beak to get food.
Very specific triggers and responses.
Incredibly specific. And honeybees doing their waggle dance to show others where food is. That's pure instinct. Spiders spinning webs.
Without lessons.
Exactly. Male fish fighting in ritualized ways. Ducklings swimming right after hatching. Birds building species-specific nests. Caterpillars spinning cocoons. The list goes on.
And the goose and the egg example is always mentioned, isn't it?
Ah, yes, the classic fixed action pattern. It's a perfect illustration. The sight of an egg outside the nest is the trigger.
And the goose rolls it back.
Yes, with a very specific neck and bill movement. And the really interesting part, once that behavior starts, it continues to completion, even if you snatch the egg away mid-roll.
No way.
Yes, the goose will just keep making the rolling motion in the air.
Yeah.
And it'll try to roll back other egg-shaped things too, golf balls, doorknobs, sometimes even responding more strongly to an exaggerated larger fake egg.
Wow. That really shows how automatic and, well, inflexible these patterns can be.
It does.
But this theory, despite these examples, ran into problems, didn't it? It wasn't the final answer.
Not at all. It faced major criticisms. A big one was just how hard it was to actually, scientifically test and prove.
It's easy to label something an instinct, harder to prove it's only instinct.
Precisely. Critics argued human behavior is just too complex and varied. It's likely a mix of things: learning, culture, environment, maybe some biological predispositions, not just a list of instincts.
And just calling something an instinct doesn't really explain why it happens, does it?
That was another key criticism. It can become a circular argument. Why does the bird migrate? Instinct. What is instinct? The thing that makes the bird migrate. It doesn't explain the underlying mechanism.
Okay, so what were some other major knocks against it?
Well, it just couldn't explain everything people do. Laughing at a joke, driving a car, learning calculus. Are those instincts? Probably not.
Seems unlikely.
And if behavior was purely instinctual, you'd expect the same trigger to always produce the same response. But we know that's not true for humans. You can be hungry but choose not to eat, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Dieting, fasting, waiting for dinner.
Exactly. Our behavior isn't that rigid. Also, things like wanting to learn, seeking out challenges, creating art. Instinct theory doesn't have a great explanation for those. Learning and reinforcement seem like better explanations there.
So the sheer variety and flexibility of human action was a problem for the theory.
A huge problem. Plus, even something that seems basic, like mothering behavior. Is it purely instinct? Research shows it's heavily influenced by experience, knowledge, social support, expectations.
Right, it varies a lot.
And finally, the difficulty of studying these things scientifically. Observing and experimenting on supposed human instincts is just incredibly challenging compared to, say, a goose rolling an egg.
Much harder to control all the variables with humans.
Definitely. So the main criticisms boil down to lack of solid proof and testability, failure to explain the full range of behavior, and the vagueness of the instinct label itself.
So where does that leave us now? Is the idea of instinct totally gone from psychology?
Not completely gone, no. Modern psychology generally accepts that biology plays a role, that some basic behavioral tendencies might have an innate evolutionary basis.
But it's not the whole picture.
Far from it. The emphasis now is much more on the interaction between any potential biological predispositions and, crucially, our learning, our life experiences, our culture, the environment.
So nature and nurture interacting in complex ways.
Exactly. Think about understanding a joke. It depends so much on shared language, cultural context, personal history, things that are learned, not innate.
Right. What's funny to me might not be funny to you based on our different backgrounds.
Precisely. So while those early grand instinct theories aren't the main framework anymore, psychologists are still interested in how underlying biological processes might influence behavior. But it's seen as much more flexible, much more shaped by experience.
Okay. So we've traced instinct theory from its early days with figures like McDougall and Freud, seen the compelling examples, but also understood the criticisms that led psychology to, well, broader explanations for motivation.
It's a fascinating journey, seeing how the thinking evolved.
It really makes you think about that mix, doesn't it? The balance between what might be innate in us and how much our lives and learning shape who we are and why we do things.
Absolutely. That interplay is really at the heart of understanding behavior now.
And maybe a final thought for everyone listening. If some of our core drives do have roots in instinct, how much conscious control do we truly have over those deep-seated desires? And how does our environment, our society, ultimately mold the way those basic urges get expressed in our everyday lives?
That's a deep question. Definitely something to chew on.